My name is Valentine, I'm a software developer, and I like to share my passion for APIs with others in a way that is easy to understand. When I'm not speaking at a conference or traveling the world, I like to share what I know by creating short tutorials and online courses like this one. In this course, you will understand what Postman is and why do we need this tool. Start using Postman to interact with APIs and write API tests. In the last part of the course, we'll explore ways to automate the entire testing process. You will get hands-on experience using an API. Throughout the course, I'll give you assignments as a way to practice what you have learned. If you are serious about API testing, you need to practice on your own. Make sure you check the video description for the course notes. I'll be putting there the most important steps you need to take, links to resources, any updates, just in case something has changed. So let's get started. Before we get our hands dirty, let's make sure we understand the basics. If you're new to APIs, here is a very quick introduction. An API is essentially an interface to a server that has some data or does some actions. To understand the concept of an interface, think about any power outlet you have in your home. It does not matter which device you want to power, your laptop, a washing machine, or a TV. The outlet on the wall is designed to accept any plug following a predefined specification. An interface is essentially a contract. I live here in Europe, so all sockets have a specific form. If I bring a device from the United States or Australia, this will not work as they have a different interface. The APIs we are dealing with share a similar concept. To use an API, we need to know and follow the specification. If you are totally new to APIs, I do recommend watching another course here at Free Code Camp, created by Craig Dennis, to get the basics of APIs right. I think the best way to understand APIs is by actually using them. Let's get back to Postman. Postman is a tool for interacting with web-based APIs. That is, APIs that work over the internet. An API is like an outlet that a server offers, and instead of electricity, we get data. We use Postman to plug into this outlet, but instead of using a physical cable, we use the internet. Postman can help us connect to that API and make sure that the process of sending and receiving data is much easier. Without that interface to the server, it would be much harder to communicate. So this is why we need Postman. In this lesson, we'll learn how to install Postman. Postman uses a freemium pricing model, and for many use cases, including this course, it is free to use. There are two ways of running Postman: in your browser by going to postman.com, or as a standalone app that you have to download and install. There is also an old and deprecated Google Chrome extension. Don't use that one. I'll be using the browser application throughout this tutorial, but the app's functionality is very similar. You will find installation instructions in the course notes. I'll go to postman.com and sign up for an account. The setup after this is relatively easy, and I will not create a team yet. This is it. Postman is actively developed. By the time I have finished recording, editing, and publishing this course, a new version will be released. You may notice slight differences from what you see right now in this video. However, I can reassure you that the principles stay the same. I will update the course notes if there's something really important you need to know. The first thing that I like to do when opening Postman for the first time is changing to the black theme. So in order to do that, simply locate this gear icon. This will take us to the settings. And from the tab with themes, I'll select the black theme and simply close this. So let's go ahead and start using an API in Postman. For this course, we'll be using an API that allows us to order a book. Now, every time we want to start using an API, we need to understand how to interact with that API. And the best way to start is always by looking at the API documentation. Now, any API out there that you want to use should have an API documentation that explains you how to use that API, explains what's available, and so on. The API that we'll be using allows us to have a look at a list of books and to order a book. So, right from the API documentation that you see here, and that will be linked in the course notes, you'll be able to see that the API is available at this specific address. And additionally, there are some endpoints that we can use. Endpoints offer different kind of responses, and we're going to take a look at them. The first endpoint that we should look into is the status endpoint. So what I'm going to do is simply copy the address of the API. And here inside Postman, from the workspaces, I will select my workspace. Workspaces in Postman allow you to organize your work better. Let me make this a bit bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a new tab. And this looks pretty much similar to what you have in a browser. It's just a bit more advanced. I'm going to paste here the address. And after it, I'm going to write status. All requests that will go to this API must include this address here. I'm going to hit here the send button. And what I'm going to get back is in the lower part of the screen. I'm going to say status OK. So this is our first request in Postman. We have sent a request to this API, to this status endpoint. And essentially the status endpoint is just telling us that the API is available, is working as expected, and that we can start using it.
Take control of your API. Allow users to create unique API tokens for different integrations. It's more secure than passwords and even works in single sign-on environments. No changes in your third-party applications are required. Only replace the password with a token.
Next, let's take a closer look at what has happened here. You can notice here in the address that we are using this HTTPS protocol. HTTPS stands for Hypertext Transport Protocol, HTTP, and the S means secure, so it's a secure connection. Most APIs should be using HTTPS, but for the purpose of what I'm going to demonstrate next, HTTP and HTTPS are essentially the same thing. Now, just to do a bit of HTTP recap. In our communication between the client and the server, now in this case, the client is Postman and the server or the API is this Simple Books API, we are using HTTP messages. The HTTP message that goes from Postman to the API is called a request, and what is coming back from the API is the response. The request in Postman is represented here on the upper part. And essentially, Postman allows you to configure many things about the request. The request will contain the URL or the address where you're sending this request. In this case, we have this is the address of the API and this is the endpoint, but we are specifying everything in one address. We also have the request method, and we'll get into that a bit later. We can specify headers, and Postman has been kind enough and already added a few headers for us. And we're going to take a look at those headers a bit later. And we also can specify a body, which for a GET request, we don't need to do that. We'll never do it for a GET request because with a GET request, we're just trying to get data. We're not sending any data. But for example, with a POST request, we will specify a body. Now, this is essentially what is happening with a request. So again, just to quickly recap, Postman allows us to configure the different properties of the HTTP request. On the lower part of the screen here, this is the response. And the response also contains some properties. You will find the status code, in this case 200. The response will also contain some headers, and generally both for the request and the response, the headers are like some meta information, some additional information that goes with a message. It's not always necessary to have this, but it just makes the communication a bit easier. Just to give you an example here, what's coming back here is a header called content type. And it's telling essentially Postman that, hey, what we have received here is represented as JSON. You'll see here application/JSON. And using this information, Postman can look at the response body and say, oh, I know this is JSON, so I'm going to display it as JSON instead of using, for example, text, which you can see doesn't look so nice. So these are like some additional things that travel both with the request and the response. The response will also contain what is probably the most interesting and most important part, the response body. Essentially, the response body contains the entire response. Whatever we wanted to get as an information from the server will be available in the response body. I'm going to point out the different parts of the HTTP request message and HTTP response message throughout the course, but I just wanted to do a short recap of what's available and where you can find this information inside Postman. Now, let's say that we want to keep this request. We already have configured here the API address, and let's say we want to reuse it at a later point. So what we can do here is click on this Save button inside Postman. And we can also give this request a name. For example, we can call it API status. And we cannot simply save this request as it is. We'll see here that this Save button is disabled. We have to create a collection. A collection is essentially a list of multiple requests. Typically, they are all connected to the same API. So if you're working with multiple APIs, probably will have a collection for each individual API, or sometimes even for the same API, depending on the use cases. So I'm going to go ahead here, click on Create Collection, and I'm going to call it Simple Book API. Click here on this check mark. And now this request will be saved in this collection. If I go ahead and close the tab, we'll be able to find here in this part here of collections, we'll see here the collection itself. And if I click on one of the requests inside a collection, the tab will automatically open up and I can run that request again. Typically in Postman, we try to avoid having addresses or configuration in our requests just in case something changes. So I'm going to go ahead, select this address here. And you will see here that Postman offers this set as a variable. So essentially we can replace this with a variable that we can configure in a single place. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to click here on Set as Variable. I'm going to select here Set as a New Variable. I'm going to call it base URL because this is the URL where all our requests will go and we'll just use different endpoints. The value that will be saved is available here and should not include the final slash. We also have to select the scope. Now there are different scopes available in Postman where we can save this variable. I'm going to get into those a bit later. For this example, we're going to select the collection scope. So essentially, this variable will be saved in the collection. And that's about it. I can go ahead and save this request again. And you will see here, if I hover over this variable that has this very special syntax here with double curly braces in the beginning and two double curly braces at the end, you will also see the value that this has. If you want to change this variable, all we have to do is to hover over the collection name here. These three dots will show up. I'm going to select here Edit. And from the Variables tab, you'll be able to see here the base URL variable. Just in case this set variable option doesn't appear when you select the address, Don't worry about it, you can simply go ahead and manually add the variable here. For any variables in Postman, you will notice the initial value and the current value. The initial value is something